another dry and windy day in paradise.
Hi everyone, it's Ev with the Bluff Council, coming to you from Paradise, California, my hometown. I'm in my mom's backyard right now shooting this, and wanted to get on here and talk about the film The Lost Bus. This is a new film starring Matthew McConaughey and America Ferrera that is going to, it's getting a limited theatrical release right now and will end up on Apple TV here in the next month or so. It focuses on the campfire, which in 2018 came from over these mountains, that canyon over there, and pretty much decimated the town of Paradise. So obviously, as someone who grew up here and who's still very connected to the town, had to talk about this movie. So in discussing this film, I'm going to do my best to avoid any sort of like major spoilers, at least until halfway or so into the video, and I'll give a heads up when I start talking about more specific story elements like that. I'm also going to do my best to not dive in too deep or dwell on like the ramifications of the film or sort of the bigger picture questions about like ethical dilemmas of turning a story like this into a Hollywood production and all that stuff. I'll probably touch on that a little bit. Keith and I did a podcast episode about this a while back where we talked about this based on the trailer that we saw for this film. But I want to try to stay focused on discussing this film, critiquing this film, reviewing this film from just a film standpoint, you know, like, is it a good movie? What are the good things about it? What are the things I wish were different? And I'll try to stay as unbiased as possible, although obviously this is a very personal story for me. The existence of this film has given me a lot of mixed emotions. So I want to talk about some of that stuff too. Okay, so just the briefest of backgrounds here, a little bit of context from where I'm coming from with my perspective, is I grew up in Paradise. You know, I was raised here from the time I was 6 or 7 years old, and growing up in Paradise was fantastic. It was just, I loved my childhood. And when I would move away and I'd take jobs in other places, I moved to the Bay Area, I moved to Boston, moved to Los Angeles, and I always felt like I was taking a part of Paradise with me, and I always looked forward to when I could return home to visit. And then so when the fire occurred on November 8th, 2018, my wife and I, Monique, she also grew up here in Paradise. We were living in Los Angeles at the time, but you know, our moms were still living up here and lots of other friends and family. And so we actually drove up that day and tried to get as close as we could to like meet with friends and family who had been evacuated and just be connected. And in the weeks and months following the fire, we actually started working on a documentary film, which was called All Its Name Implies, which was released in 2020, which sort of told the story of Paradise before, during, and right after the fire there. And that's been available on Prime Video, and was just a big labor of love, and really felt like we got connected back to the town and the region in a major way, and was, you know, a big part of the reason we moved back up to the area. We moved to Chico, which is just down the hill from Paradise, a few years ago, and we've been here ever since. And I try to be really involved and plugged in to everything that's going on in Paradise, and aid as best I can in like the rebuilding efforts and bringing this town back to what it was. So obviously, very personal story for me. Seeing that there are now, you know, we've seen this wave of documentary films that came out right after the fire, including my own, but now seeing like this first sort of narrative picture, like this adaptation, you know, this based on a true story version, is very surreal, and a little strange. It might be, you know, it's the first of several rumored productions. We heard that there'd be one about the football team that year, the high school football team. We heard there was I read that there was a story optioned about a woman who gave birth that morning at the hospital up here in Paradise and who had to evacuate. And so there might be more movies like this coming. And so I was grateful for the opportunity to be able to see this film. And like I said before, lots of mixed emotions. So let's get right into it. I guess what I'd say is, my takeaways from watching this film, my immediate reaction was that it was very affecting. I thought, as far as like an experience, like an emotional movie-going experience, I thought it was good. Like, it did its job. Those fire action scenes in particular are very like affecting, and they really like, I think I would assume it accomplishes its goals in making you feel uncomfortable and very tense and sad, you know what I'm saying? And even if I wasn't personally connected to this area, you know, you get emotional because it's very intense stuff and folks are narrowly escaping death, and you know, it does a good job of creating that atmosphere. So as an experience, I think it's fine. I think it's pretty good. As a movie itself, you know, that experience portion kind of only takes you so far. I think as a movie, it's okay. Yeah, it's all right. It's an okay movie. It has some things I didn't like about it. As I left the theater, I was kind of on this like emotional high, this adrenaline high, and I thought, oh man, that was a lot better than I thought it was going to be. Because I had, you know, I don't want to say, but like kind of low expectations. I thought I thought I wouldn't like it as much. And I walked out of there thinking that was better. That was better than I thought. But then it was like one of those things after half an hour, I started feeling like, oh, you know what? I didn't really like that. Oh yeah, that was kind of silly, or, you know, it started coming down. So I want to talk more about those specifics, but I'd say as a movie, it's just sort of average. You know what I mean? Like I'd say go check it out. You know, it's fine. And then as a representation of Paradise, sort of that bigger picture stuff that I was alluding to, I don't like it. I don't like it as much. So as an experience, pretty good. As a movie, it's okay. As a representation of our town that we love up here, I don't love it. I don't like it. So, what do I mean by all that? I'll start with what I liked about it, and we'll kind of work our way down. The things that I think stood out the most to me about it were, as I mentioned, sort of like those fire action sequences, for lack of a better term. I thought those were pretty well done. You know, I thought the effects were largely good. I thought Paul Greengrass's direction, you know, he has a reputation for these very like visceral, rapid kind of, you know, documentary style action sequences. And a lot of that stuff was, like I said, very compelling. It draws you in, and was just the right amount, in my opinion, of like emotional and intense, and you know, maybe a little like exaggerated, but never felt to me like cartoonish or stupid, or like where I was watching Dante's Peak or Volcano, you know what I mean? Like not just like silly for the sake of silly. And I thought I was really grateful for that, because that was sort of one of my fears going in. So in terms of like creating this environment and taking us through these really scary moments, I thought that was well done. One of my favorite things, if not my favorite thing about the movie, and certainly the thing that got me the most emotionally, was during a lot of those sequences, they would intercut like real cell phone footage from folks who took that while they were escaping Paradise. So it'll sort of just be like doing like an establishing shot, and then it'll cut to a cell phone shot that like I know, because I've seen, because I looked through a lot of this footage as I was making my own documentary, and I know a lot of the stories behind those shots. So you can imagine, like in those moments, I'm like, oh my God, there's that footage. I know that, you know. And that, I think, was a really great choice. Like, I commend the filmmakers for that. I also think that the two lead performances are very good. I don't think that's probably much of a surprise. Matthew McConaughey and America Ferrera are two very talented people. I think McConaughey especially elevates a lot of the material that is otherwise a little unspectacular, which we'll get to, Segway Kings, in the next section. And beyond that, I don't know that there's anything I would be like super complimentary of. It's not to say that everything else is terrible, but I just think like those are the things that really stood out to me as being the best parts. The performances of those two leads, and the overall energy and feeling and emotion and direction really of those more action-packed sequences, handled, I thought, very deftly. Things I liked a little bit less, right? Things I wasn't a big fan of. I'll tell you you're gonna think this is nitpicky. If Keith was here, he'd be like, you shut up, you always say this. He sounds just like that. It's a perfect Keith impression. I think a lot of the effects were better than I imagined they would be, but then there are scenes that don't really require effects, that don't require CGI at all. And they're CGI though. Like, I say with some confidence that the opening two shots of the film, which are just sort of these what would otherwise be like helicopter or drone shots, like kind of coming in across the canyon around Paradise, and you see trees and blown in the wind, and the power lines, the PG&E power structures that failed to start the fire. You see those kind of blown in the wind, and it's all computer. Like it's just not a real shot. And those are the first things you see in this film, and that really immediately you're in a big hole you got to dig me out of, because it looks a little phony, it looks a little digital. Everything, the wind blowing looks digital. And then so it's just like that's just just go up to that place. We got the canyon right here. It's literally right here. Just go up this road and you can film the power, you know what I mean? Like the towers, the trees. There's no need to create that in a computer. I think that's stupid, and I wish they hadn't done that. In general, that opens up a larger conversation about I wish they filmed here. They filmed, the bulk of this film, if not all of it, in New Mexico, both in a town there and then in sound stages. And I understand, we don't have large sound stages around here, but there was a lot of stuff, a lot of exteriors that could have been done around here. Even, I don't know, whatever, no one cares. But like, film up here. It would have gone a long way, I think, to endearing this production even more to this area, which I would say is important. But one of my big picture sort of things here, my big picture ideas, and I don't think this is a spoiler at all, but in terms of the way the film is structured, and this might be my biggest complaint, is, to me, the first half of the film is really interesting as it sets up this disaster, this impending tragedy, and it feels like a really big thing. Like as the fire starts out from the distance, out that way, like I said, over the canyon, and starts kind of creeping its way in, and it first hits the community of Concow out there. It comes from Polga and hits Concow, and there's stuff in the film that starts to show that, right? So you see the people in paradise are thinking it's just another day, and simultaneously the people out in Concow are already living through hell, which is one of the most intense and maybe memorable sequences of the film, is what's happening in Concow. But so it introduces all of this, and you start to kind of get this big sense of everything that's happening, and that feels interesting, and that feels like oh, I like where this is going. As the film goes on, the focus of the story really narrows to just what's happening on that bus with the bus driver, the teacher, Kevin McKay, Mary Ludwig, and the children. And it starts to feel really kind of small. And a lot of the stuff that it introduced early in the film, it's never spoken of again. That really emotional scene in Concow, it puts people in some very precarious, life or death situation, and you don't really know how that ends up, and then it never talks about it again. Like there's never a comment like, hey chief, don't worry, they got him out of that. You know what I mean? It's just like, oh, what happened to those people? That was kind of a major thing. And there was a couple other things like that where I think, like, as the film starts to feel more and more narrow just to this story, and then it ends, and then I feel like there's a lot of open-ended things, and I don't feel like I get this conclusion that's appropriate for such a massive situation. And I understand this film is not about the campfire as a whole. It is about the heroics of these folks on this bus and keeping those kids safe, and that story, which is great and worthy of a story, worthy of attention like this from a major film. But like, it feels a little hollow in a way that it just sort of wraps up and never really wraps up what happened here. And so I'm sure that's a tall task. I'm not saying that's an easy thing to do. It's like, make this personal story and also tell the story of the campfire. Like that would take 30 movies. I just wish it had been done a little better here. That's probably my biggest complaint. As a part of that, I also think that the children on the bus are just, this is like, and this is in the film, obviously, not the actual children who went through this traumatic event. But I sort of think the film kind of keeps the children on the bus as almost just like props. Like they're just devices that are there to say where's Kevin going? Where's Mary going? And they're just kind of there in the background to provide a little extra emotion. But we don't ever get into really understanding their plight, I would say, or really feeling emotionally connected to any of the children outside of a couple sort of shallow and superficial sound too negative, but just I mean it just in the literal sense, these sort of superficial interactions that they have with a couple of the kids. I would have probably liked to see more and feel more from their perspective of what was going on, instead of just the America Ferrera and Matthew McConaughey storylines, their own character issues. So that's another little gripe. And then I would say that there were a lot of scenes the film kind of cuts back and forth between the fire action and then what's going on in the fire captain, the CAL FIRE home base, where you got a lot of different fire professionals talking about what's going on and trying to solve the problem and trying to fight the fire and make, And so those scenes are largely there to fill in the audience, just kind of exposition to be this is what's happening now. Chief, we got all this trouble up here and it's gonna cross and we don't know what. And so I totally understand that those scenes need to be there, but I did feel like those scenes, while serving their purpose in terms of the exposition of the story, were just kind of otherwise lacking. There wasn't a tremendous amount of emotional depth to those scenes, and I think that was a really big missed opportunity. I think those scenes should also really hold some real emotional weight and pack a punch. And I would say the actor Yul Vasquez, who's in a lot of stuff and who's good in a lot of stuff. I apologize. I'm not trying to be rude, but I don't think he brought a lot to this. And so that kind of also amplified those scenes in just sort of their blankness. like where it's just like, oh God, oh. And it tries to give him a scene where he goes in the bathroom and he's looking in the mirror and he's splashing water in his face. But like that character, I think a fictionalized character of Chief Martinez was his name. Like I would have loved to have been more of an emotional core of the film, because he's a main part of this. It's like, you know, half of the film is his reactions to things. And those felt just like kind of missed opportunities a little bit for me. Other than that, as we start to get into a little more nitpicky stuff, it's just like, I thought, you know, some of the family dynamic stuff with McConaughey and his son and his parents felt a little melodramatic, like not quite hokey, but just like, I didn't think like some of that, like the writing was a little on the nose. Like, I hate you, Dad. Oh, I wish you were dead. Like, you know, I don't know. This is like not hyper realistic, just felt very movie. But again, I thought McConaughey's performance in all those scenes like made that stuff feel better. But then as you kind of sit back and you think about it, you're like, oh yeah, that was just kind of on the nose. And you don't really get a lot of details of like why there's such turmoil in their family and why his wife, his ex-wife, whatever, hates him, and she gets on the phone with him at one point, and like, I don't even think that like, the vocal performance is very good. It's a little corny, but you know, we're getting into nitpicks a little bit. So all in all, it's like those are the reasons I would say that like I felt the movie was just sort of like uneven. It was really tough to watch. I found, you know, like there was a few parts that, you know, the whole film's obviously referencing our street names and our town names and our surrounding community names, and Magalia and Oroville and Polga and Concow and Billy Park. And at one point there's the logo for the Gold Nugget Museum, which is the museum up here. Like, I built the website for the Gold Nugget Museum. I edit videos for them. You know, I work for them. Like, seeing that logo in a movie like this, like that really triggers something where you're like, oh my God, there's, you know. But all that said, I go back to the point I'll just touch on. I won't dwell, like I said, but just like, I wish it could have been shot at least partially here. I think that would have gone a long way to just like helping it feel better, more organic. There's no reason why they couldn't have come up here for a couple of weeks and shot some of these exteriors here and the bus driving through our roads. Like, you know, I digress. The only other, this might be the point of like a spoiler, but even this isn't like a huge plot spoiler, I would say, is I didn't love, they introduced so I should mention, this movie is based on a book called Paradise, One Town's Struggle to Survive an American Wildfire, by the reporter Lizzie Johnson, which came out several years ago. And so the story of this bus, this bus driver and these two teachers, in real life there were two teachers, that helped, you know, keep these kids alive and got them out to safety. That story was one of the stories covered in this book. And while I haven't read this book yet, unfortunately, I'm not sure if this part that I'm about to mention was in the book or if it was just sort of like a Hollywood creation. But one thing that really threw me for a loop, probably more than anything, was there's a scene where, you know, it's really intense, there's fire everywhere. McConaughey and America Ferrera have the kids on the bus, they're trying to get out, and all of a sudden there's like this sort of like roving group of men that are like looting, and we know they're looting because America Ferrera says, oh no, it's looters. And then they start coming towards and like advancing on the bus, and then one of them is trying to pry open the bus door and has a revolver, like is holding a gun, and it starts to be like, what? And then so like McConaughey has to like kind of kick him out and they drive off or whatever. And while, you know, I don't know, I don't think I look at any of this through what happened anyways through rose-colored glasses, but I have never heard, and you know, I've interviewed 40 plus people and talked to hundreds more about their experiences that day. I've never heard anyone talk about like roving bands of looters, armed or otherwise. And so I didn't like that. Like, that made me really uncomfortable because I'm just like, what is this? Like this, and it's not just because I'm trying to like see Paradise as like, oh, no one would ever do that. Like, it's desperate times, I understand. But like, I think the circumstances that were up here that day were so intense that it was like, get out. Like, there wasn't an opportunity for shameless opportunists to be like, oh, let's go bust into the camera store and try to get some cameras or get a TV, or like, it was like, it's time to go. Everything's burning down. Much less someone with a gun trying to like commandeer that school bus. That felt, and then so we were like, why would they do that? And it's like, oh, maybe to add a little more action or a little more intensity. But then I also realized, like, my wife and I were talking after that, maybe it's because they wanted to like sort of protect against the question that an audience might have is like, why didn't they pull over to help other people and get them on the bus? And maybe it's because, you know, they were looters. We don't know who's good and who's bad out here. And so maybe that was a way for the writers to kind of like hedge against that. So either way, whatever the reasons, I don't love that. If that is indeed something that did happen on that day, and it's in the book, like I'll kind of stand corrected on that. But if it wasn't, and it was just a creation for the movie, I think that sucks. But other than that, like, the movie's fine. I could ramble forever about my thoughts about it from like sort of like a Paradise perspective. But check out mine and Keith's podcast episode, because we talk a lot about it there. And really, at the end of the day, I just think it comes down to like, does the movie do honor to Paradise? I've kind of heard that a lot, and I was like, I'm not in any position to answer that question. I can only speak for myself. I feel like, to me, the film does respect what happened. Does handle things with some degree of tact and control, and consideration, but also like, it also feels a little dirty. And I think like there's probably no way for it not to. It's come out since, in these last couple of weeks that the production, or Apple or whomever is going to like donate a significant amount of money, I think, to helping to complete a memorial up here that's been long in the works and kind of stagnated. So that's really great, and that's really generous, and we're happy to hear that. But also at the same time, I think a lot of folks are going to have conflicting emotions just about like this thing being created for entertainment purposes. And that's just sort of like an unanswerable question, because like, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to that. There's always going to be films and dramatizations made about natural disasters or tragedies, things that happen. And it would be hypocritical of me personally now to be like, you shouldn't do that, because like, I've watched and enjoyed a lot of other films about those sort of, real world tragedies without ever having, raising an alarm or complaint. So I'm not going to start now. I will just say that as a movie, it's okay. And I don't mean that to be mean. Keith and I talk all the time. It's like, there's got to be room for just okay. Online, it's got to be the greatest thing ever or the biggest piece of shit of all time. It's not. It's okay. It's okay. So if you want a diversion, you go check it out in the theater. It'd be great to watch at home when it hits Apple here next month. It's totally fine. It's totally fine. The people, Kevin McKay, Mary Ludwig et al., who were involved in this particular story, deserve all the credit in the world, as does everyone else in Paradise. There were so many heroes that day. And so I hope that folks who do watch this film will think about Paradise, be reminded of the bravery and the heroism and the resilience of these people up here who are working so hard to bring their lives back and to bring their town back. And I hope it can be unifying for the people that are here. And I hope that you'll come and visit Paradise for yourself. Truly, come check it out. It's a beautiful place filled with some really wonderful people who are working really hard to bring back their community. And it's inspiring. It's inspiring to be around here and be even just like tangentially a part of that. So thank y'all. Thank y'all for watching. I know this was maybe a little less chipper than some of our regular episodes, but we've been on a little pause. Keith and I have been very busy people, very important people. But we're going to be back with some new episodes soon. So we appreciate y'all's patience during this little lull. But wanted to pop in for this conversation because it's one that's important to me for sure. So thank you all. We appreciate you watching, and we love you, Paradise. And we'll see you soon. All right.